And so then I would say, with regards to your antithesis between liberalism and conservatives, the conservatives are pointing to the fact that there are intermediary forms of distribution that can be utilized to solve the social problems that you're describing that don't bring with them the associated problem of gigantism. And like it's been shocking to me to watch the left, especially in the last 6 years, ally itself, for example, with pharmaceutical companies, which was something I'd never thought I would see in my lifetime. I mean, for decades, the only gigantic corporations the left was more skeptical of than the fossil fuel companies were the pharmaceutical companies. And that all seemed to vanish overnight around the COVID time. So I know the story. That's a lot of things to throw at you, but it sort of outlines the territory that we could probably investigate productively.
First thing I noticed is I don't know if you guys have watched Destiny do debates before. I've never seen him with a pen and paper. What does that tell you? He's talking to a genius. So he needs to be writing down and remember every point. Now, I'm on the side that says he has seen Jordan Peterson do this. So to make it look more professional, he decided to come with pen and paper. That's my belief, because I've never seen him in a debate do this, right? So I believe he did this because he's talking to a genius. And if you're going to be talking to a genius, you need to be, in order to remember the point, you got to be putting them down, which I think he's doing it for the camera. You know, that's what I believe. Maybe he's doing it for real, but that's what I believe. Now, with regards to what they're talking about, it's obviously everybody knows what happened during the COVID issues, right? Where some governments allied or came together with the big companies, pharmaceutical companies that were making the COVID vaccines, because the governments were paid actually, not were paying. I'm probably still paying pharmaceutical companies to make vaccinations or vaccines to give to people, right? So there's always going to be that interest, the corporate interest from the pharmaceutical companies, and it's more established in the US because lobbying, that's too much. But you guys, if you know what I'm talking about, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The companies lobby for the politicians they want, and during certain times the politicians may make laws or pass policies that favor the companies. It's a give or take. I give you something, give me something. So that's a whole, I don't want to go too political, but I think what Jordan Peterson was trying to do was to lay out. I don't think he disagreed with Destiny at all. I think he kind of was laying out, because Destiny, I feel like, gave a surface level for most people, but I think Jordan Peterson was kind of peeling back that layer to show exactly this is what the right do, this is what the left do, and this is where we are now. So I think right now it's more of a discussion rather than a debate, more of an understanding of each other's point of view.
Yeah, so a couple things. I would say that the current political landscape we have, I think, is less. I understand the concept of conservatives supporting corporations and liberals supporting like large government. I think today the divide we're starting to see more and more is more of like a populist, anti-populist rise, or even like an institutional or anti-institutional rise. So, for instance, I think conservatives today in the United States are largely characterized with, I would say, with populism, and that they're supporting like certain figures, namely right now Donald Trump, who they think alone can kind of like lead them against the corrupt institutions, be them corporate or government. I feel like most conservatives today are not as trustful of big corporations as they were back in like the Bush era, where we would, conservatives would champion, big corporations.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah.
That's a strange thing, because it makes the modern conservatives a lot more like the 60s leftists.
Potentially, yeah.
I mean, that brings us into the issue, too, of whether the left-right divide is actually a reasonable way of construing the current political landscape at all. And I'm not sure it is, but
Right now, it kind of is, but only because so many conservatives are following Trump. So, like, your populist, anti-populist thing kind of maps on kind of cleanly to the left and right. It doesn't work with progressives, though, or the far left, because they're also anti-large everything. So, in a surprising way, on very, very far left people, you might find them having a bit more in common with kind of like a MAGA Trump supporter than like a center-left liberal. So, for instance, like both of these groups of people on the very far left will be very dovish on foreign policy, probably a little bit more isolationist. They're not a big fan of like a ton of immigration or a ton of trade with other countries. They might think that there's a lot of institutional capture of both government and corporations. So both all of the MAGA supporters and the far, far left might think that corporations don't have our best interest at heart and the government is corrupt and captured by lobbyists. You'll see a lot of overlap there.
Right.
I think that sometimes there's a couple things. One, this is something I feel like I've discovered. People have no principles. I think that people are largely guided by whatever is kind of satisfying them or making them feel good at the time. I think that's a really important.
Oh, so Destiny has discovered that sometimes people have no principles and they're guided by, what did he say? Something about being satisfied in the moment. Destiny, you are in an open relationship where you allowed your ex-wife to sleep with other men. Could that be a lack of principles and maybe letting yourself be satisfied by short-term, whatever the thing you had going on in your marriage? Is Destiny having some kind of self-awareness? I like this Destiny.
Important thing to understand because people's beliefs will seem to change at random. If you're trying to imagine that a belief is coming from some underlying principle or is governed by some internal, like moral or reasonable code or whatever, I think generally there are large social groups and people kind of follow them along from thing to thing, which is why you end up in strange worlds sometimes where like the position on vaccines and being an anti-vaxxer might have been seen as something, 10 years ago as kind of like a hippie leftist. And now maybe it's more like a conservative or it's associated more with like MAGA Trump supporters or whatever. I think as a result of how the social groups move around. When it comes to you mentioned this like gigantism.
Actually, I disagree with Destiny. The whole anti-vaccines and the whole thing wasn't just conservatives. Even some liberals or leftists who didn't want it, especially because some people had to lose their jobs. People who were in the army, some soldiers apparently were let go. The whole job thing. Like some people had to lose their job just because they didn't want to take the vaccination. And some of those people were leftists, right? Some of those people were liberals, right? Not everyone was conservative who was against the mass forceful vaccination policies that were passed in so many states. So I disagree with Destiny. It wasn't just a MAGA thing. It wasn't just a Trump supported thing. Anyone who was affected and didn't want to be forced to take the vaccination could have been liberal, could have been conservative.